Chapter 1. The luncheon had begun with all the rigid ceremony the Flaxborough Rotary prided itself upon, linen cloths so heavily starched they could have stood alone, wine glasses set with geometric precision, and a chairman whose hammer fell with the gravity of Parliament itself. The business of the day was dull enough. Votes on fund allocations, a half-hearted nod toward some charitable project in Bulgaria. The promise of food was the true attraction, but the town would remember this gathering not for its roast beef or overboiled cabbage, but for what followed the pudding. It began when Alderman Hector Mowbray rose for his toast. Mowbray was a man who adored his own voice nearly as much as he did his reflection in the mirrored walls of the luncheon room. He had just managed gentlemen of the Rotary and most esteemed guests, when his gaze faltered upon the folded napkin at his place. He had unfolded it only a moment earlier, and from it had slipped an envelope, cream-colored, with his name written in an unmistakably feminine hand. Mowbray paled, faltered, and after a hesitant tug of his lips, continued his speech. But he had scarcely reached his second sentence when the envelope slipped from his fingers and, carried by a draught or providence, fluttered downward onto the polished floor. It burst open upon landing. Half a dozen sheets spilt forth, neatly folded but easily legible to those at the nearest tables. Several pairs of eyes widened. One or two ladies covered their mouths with handkerchiefs, for written across the topmost sheet in heavy ink were the words, "Confidential Statement of Account, H. Mowbray." There followed figures, dates, and, incriminatingly, entries marked with initials few in Flaxborough could fail to recognize. The silence broke into a ripple of murmurs, then outright laughter from the less charitable of the town's worthies. Mowbray attempted to gather the papers, but his hands shook so that the pages scattered further beneath chairs and boots. His toast, needless to say, collapsed. The luncheon, however, had found a subject that would feed its gossip for weeks. "You heard about Mowbray's papers? Damn disgraceful," muttered Mr. Pottle, owner of the ironmongers. "Looks like forgery to me. He'd never be so careless," whispered Mrs. Liversedge, church verger's wife. "Mark my words, it's a political hit job. The council's cutthroat these days," offered Mr. Broom, retired solicitor. "Nonsense, it's women. Always with him. I've seen the way he looks at Mrs. Harbottle," said one of the pub regulars. "All exaggeration. Man's just unlucky with his stationery, poor chap," claimed Councillor Dodd, too quickly. Through this cloud of contradiction, Inspector Purbright sat with his usual mild composure at the end of the hall. He had been invited, half out of courtesy, half in hope of lending the luncheon some dignity. Sergeant Love, beside him, whispered, "What do you make of it, sir?" "An accident?" Purbright, instead of answering, leaned forward and studied the abandoned table. His eyes settled not upon the papers themselves, nor on the crimson-faced alderman, but upon the envelope in which the documents had been hidden. It lay torn upon the carpet, its flap strangely intact. What struck him most, however, was the absence of any seal. No gummed edge appeared to have been disturbed. Instead, the fold bore a precise slit, as though opened by a blade. "A curious thing," murmured Purbright at last. He glanced toward the luncheon serving staff, who had retreated to the doors, their eyes alight with scandal. One young waiter in particular seemed to shrink from his gaze, turning suddenly to busy himself with a stack of dessert plates. Purbright noted him quietly, his face impassive. Love, unaccustomed to silence, filled it. Well, perhaps the alderman left it lying about, and some wag slipped it into his napkin. "Perhaps," Purbright replied. His eyes, however, lingered on the waiter's oddly nervous hands, which trembled not from the weight of plates, but from something far less physical. At that moment, another hand reached for the scattered papers. This belonged to Mrs. Harbottle herself, elegant in a lavender dress. She retrieved a sheet that bore her own initials, beside a large figure of pounds sterling. For a breath, her face remained unreadable. Then she smiled faintly, too forced, and returned the page to Mowbray with what might have been kindness or contempt. The hall had grown electric, silence trembling on the brink of further scandal. As the luncheon adjourned in embarrassed fragments, Purbright made one last observation: to love. Strange how a single envelope can carry more weight than the roast and the speeches combined. His eyes narrowed. But more curious still, that envelope was never sealed. Love blinked. Meaning? That's what fell was intended to fall, Purbright said softly. But even as he spoke, another revelation awaited. Outside the luncheon hall, pinned to the notice board, someone had placed a second envelope, this one addressed not to Mowbray, but to the Rotary as a whole. A young clerk discovered it as members filed out. Inside was a brief, typewritten note. These accounts are but the beginning. More answers in Chapter 2. But first, what's your theory? Was the alderman betrayed from within his circle? Did the nervous waiter know more than he dared show? Or is the scandal broader than a man's private indiscretions? Comment below. Inspector Purbright hadn't yet left the Rotary Hall when the second envelope was discovered. It was a junior clerk from the mayor's office who spotted it, pinned to the notice board near the entrance, the paper stark against the wood like a posted proclamation. There was no name, just a standard buff envelope, hand-pinned. Inside, a single, typed message. These accounts are but the beginning. The boy handed it to Sergeant Love, wide-eyed and pale. It wasn't there when I arrived, sir. I'd have noticed. Someone must have slipped it on the board during the luncheon. Purbright turned the envelope over. No seal, no fold. The same clean slit as the earlier one, no handwriting either, just machine type, but not from a modern office printer. The ribbon was old, patchy in places, something from a home study or dusty back room. Love squinted at the paper. It sounds like a warning, or a schedule, Purbright murmured. Either way, someone wanted an audience. He stepped back, scanning the room. The tables were now mostly cleared. The remains of the roast and pudding sat under tarnished domes, long gone cold. Staff moved quietly, but not so discreetly that one young waiter escaped notice. The same one whose hands had trembled earlier. Purbright nodded toward him. That boy. Let's have a word. They approached the lad, no older than 20, wiping glasses with exaggerated focus. He looked up, then down again, too quickly. What's your name? Purbright asked gently. Colin, sir. Colin Rudge. You handled the table settings. Colin nodded. Did you place the envelope in Alderman Mowbray's napkin? The glass in his hand slipped slightly, clinking hard on the tray. No, sir, I swear. I didn't touch any envelopes, just folded napkins. Purbright's tone remained light. But you saw the envelope, yes? Colin hesitated. I thought it was just one of those little thank you cards posh people leave. I didn't read it. But it wasn't sealed, was it? Colin shook his head. No, sir. Folded like someone wanted it opened easily. Like a trap laid open, Love muttered. Purbright tapped his finger on the side of the tray. And before the luncheon started, did anyone go near that place setting? The boy glanced sideways. Mrs. Harbottle came early, said she'd misplaced her seating card, hovered by the table for a bit. Love leaned in, and she seemed like she was waiting for something, or someone. Purbright thanked him and let him go. They returned to the table. One page of the scattered accounts still lay under a chair. Purbright retrieved it, folding it carefully. The ink was the same as the envelope note, and beside one figure, £312, were the initials C.H. Love saw it too. Mrs. Harbottle Purbright's voice remained low. So it would seem. He tucked the paper away. Let's walk. Outside, the air had shifted. Word of the scandal had already begun to trickle through Flaxborough's veins. In the square, Mrs. Teasdale from the chemist's was whispering furiously into the ear of Mr. Broom, the retired solicitor. Two schoolboys raced past, imitating Mowbray's dramatic collapse. The incident had gone viral, at least by Flaxborough standards. Love kept pace beside him. "You think she did it? Slipped the envelope in, laid the whole thing out." "I think she knew it was coming," Purbright said, "and she wanted to be seen responding to it." "An alibi by way of witness?" "Exactly." They reached the station. Inside, the front desk clerk handed Purbright another envelope. "This came for you, sir, dropped off anonymously." It was a thin packet, again buff, again typed. Inside, a second ledger. Similar format to the Mowbray documents, but these bore the name T. Gloss, editor of the Flaxborough Citizen. Love whistled. "So now the press is next." Purbright's eyes narrowed. "Or they're the real target." He spread the pages. One entry stood out: August 3rd, consultation fee, £200, CH. Again, those initials. A pattern was forming, not random, a list. Love blinked. "You think we're looking at blackmail?" Purbright's tone dropped. "Number this isn't extortion." He held the paper up, letting the lamplight catch its crinkles. "This is character assassination, public and timed. The envelopes don't ask for anything. They just reveal. One per act, one per fall." A theatrical cadence, designed not for money but for spectacle. Love said it first. "So, who's next?" They didn't need to wonder long. That evening, in the mailbox outside the Citizen office, a passerby found another envelope. Same type, same slit. Inside, a single line. Friday, the council chambers, the final vote. The bait had been laid. A date, a location, and a promise. Purbright tapped the note. "Our perpetrators not just exposing sins, they're directing a show. Every audience needs tension, Sergeant. And tension needs timing." Love frowned. "So what do we do?" Purbright looked directly ahead, then, just slightly, to the camera that wasn't there. "One might notice, Sergeant. A curtain only rises when the cast is in place." Love's voice broke the silence. "Sir, what if the next envelope carries a name we haven't seen before?" Purbright's answer was soft. "Then we won't be investigating a scandal. We'll be investigating a death." More answers in Chapter 3. But first, what's your theory? Was Mrs. Harbottle manipulating the seating or being framed? Are the initials real, or are they being planted by someone close to the council? Who is the true author of the curtain's rise? Comment below. Inspector Purbright didn't sleep that night. Not properly. He sat in his office, sleeves rolled, spectacles perched halfway down his nose, studying the ledger pages in silence. Sergeant Love had dozed off twice in the chair across from him, the second time snoring lightly, a notebook still open in his lap. On the desk between them lay two documents. The first, Alderman Mowbray's ledger, penned in the same anonymous style as the now infamous luncheon envelope. The second, a similar sheet with figures and notes implicating Thomas Gloss, the editor of the Flaxborough Citizen. The pattern was unmistakable. Both were tailored for maximum humiliation, and both bore the same subtle inconsistencies. Irregular typewriter impressions, a faint chemical scent on the paper, and that precise, clean blade slit across the envelope's tops. It was theatrical, almost ritual. Purbright leaned back, hands steepled. "Sergeant," Love blinked awake. "Yes, sir." "If someone wanted to ruin these men privately, they could have sent these documents directly, but they didn't." "No, sir. They made a show of it." Purbright nodded. "Public disgrace, scheduled delivery, a taste for spectacle. This isn't a revenge spree, it's a production." Love furrowed his brow. "You think it's political? Election season." "It's not political," Purbright said. "It's poetic. A light knock interrupted the thought. The duty constable poked his head in. "Sir, someone's at the front desk. Says she has something for you. Wouldn't give her name." Purbright stood. "Let's see." At the counter, a woman in her late 50s waited, tightly wound in a checkered shawl. Her eyes flicked to the papers in Purbright's hands with something between recognition and fear. "I don't want to be involved," she said, voice low. "But I found this in my husband's study. He's out of town, and I thought I should bring it to someone before—" Purbright held out his hand. She placed an envelope into it. Buff, familiar, but slightly damp from her grip. He opened it. Inside was a sheet titled "Private for Internal Review," listing payments made to unnamed consultants, each accompanied by cryptic references: CH3, RH2, and finally, JL5. Each line bore a date within the past 6 months. Each line had one thing in common. The payouts were authorized under the council's discretionary funds. Purbright looked up. "Your husband." "Linton, Edgar Linton, council treasurer. Please don't mention I was here." She turned and fled before they could say another word. Love caught the name instantly. "Edgar Linton's always been tight with Mowbray. If he's next—" "No," Purbright said softly. "He's not next. He was before." They sat again in the office, papers spread like a fan of accusations. Linton's ledger didn't name names, but the initials hinted at deeper collusion. CH could well be Clarissa Harbottle. JL possibly Julian Lodge, the deputy clerk who once resigned suddenly and was later reinstated without explanation. Love scratched his head. How would someone get hold of these? Council files are locked tighter than the mayor's gin cupboard. Purbright didn't answer. His mind was already leaping across departments, council meetings, access codes, and secrets. "Sergeant, fetch me the Rotary seating chart from yesterday's luncheon." Love did so. The inspector unfolded it slowly. At the top, Mowbray. Adjacent, Harbottle. 4 seats down, Thomas Gloss. And near the end, barely noticed, hardly ever invited, Julian Larch. Purbright tapped the name. "I want to speak with him. Now." It was nearing midnight when they reached Larch's flat, an overgrown annex above a shuttered tailor's shop. Julian Larch answered the door in his shirt sleeves, tie undone, a whiskey glass in one hand, and the startled look of someone who'd never had police knock on his door for reasons that didn't involve noise complaints or misplaced parking meters. "Inspector, this is unexpected." Purbright's voice was calm. "We're investigating some documents. We'd appreciate a word inside." Larch hesitated, then opened the door wide. The flat was modest. Clean enough, though the books on the shelves seemed untouched, as if placed for impression more than pleasure. The only thing of note was the typewriter, an older Remington model perched on a desk near the window. Purbright's eyes landed on it instantly. "You still type?" "Occasionally. I draft letters, council memos. The usual." Larch swallowed. "Why?" Purbright crossed to it without waiting for permission. The ribbon was misaligned. The keystrokes bore the same faint bleed as the notes they'd received. He turned to Larch. "You typed them." Larch paled. "I don't know what you mean." "The envelopes, the notes, the ledgers. This machine made them." Larch looked at the floor. "I didn't write the numbers. I was given pages, handwritten, told to type them clean. For record keeping, they said." "They?" Larch hesitated. "Someone in the council, someone senior, said it was for an audit, an anonymous one." Love stepped forward. "You didn't think that was strange?" Larch's voice grew defensive. "I was paid. Cash. Told not to ask questions. I thought, maybe it was internal politics. You know what Mowbray's like." Purbright kept his gaze steady. "Who brought you the documents?" Larch shook his head. "They were delivered. Left at my door. Always in the same envelope. No name." Purbright walked slowly to the desk, picking up the last page in the typewriter. It wasn't blank. A fresh ledger. This one wasn't complete, but the name at the top had already been typed. Clarissa Harbottle. Love stared. They're not done. Purbright nodded. 3 down, 1 in progress, which means the next act is already being rehearsed. He turned to Larch. We'll be taking the typewriter. You're not to leave town. As they stepped out into the quiet street, the wind picked up, rustling the hem of Purbright's coat. Love broke the silence. Sir, this is bigger than just a scandal. Someone's leaking internal documents, laundering them through Larch, and using them like weapons. Purbright didn't look away from the fog ahead. Someone wants the whole town to watch, to gasp, to squirm, 1 envelope at a time. Love asked, but who benefits? Purbright answered with a voice cold as the air, the one who stays clean, while the rest fall. More answers in Chapter 4. But first, what's your theory? Is Julian Larch a pawn or a partner? Who's passing him these documents? And is Clarissa Harbottle's file the last or just the next? Comment below. By morning, Flaxborough was humming. Not the gentle hum of lawn mowers or milk deliveries, but the coarse, electric buzz of gossip sharpened overnight. Alderman Mowbray hadn't been seen since the luncheon. Mrs. Harbottle, despite her name thick on everyone's tongue, had remained perfectly composed, attending a morning bridge club in a plum-colored dress and complimenting the scones without missing a beat. And Julian Larch, now uncomfortably central, had called in sick to the council office. A first, according to the clerk, who managed absences with an iron ledger. At the station, Purbright set the Remington typewriter on his desk like a crime scene relic. Beside it lay the incomplete ledger bearing Clarissa Harbottle's name, and beneath that, the previous 2 exposures. 3 files, 3 disgraced reputations in motion. The typewriter ribbon was already with forensics, but he doubted they'd find fingerprints. Whoever was orchestrating this was methodical, theatrical, and not sloppy. Love arrived carrying a brown paper envelope, glancing at the bundle on the desk with an expression that said he'd been thinking about it all night. This came through post, he said. No return address, of course. Same type, same slit. Inside was a flyer, Friday's date, a council vote. A small red dot was marked over the map of the town square, right where the public bandstand sat. Below it, a typed line. The 4th act begins at noon. Purbright took a breath, slow and deliberate. Theatre continues, he murmured. And now the audience is invited. Love shifted uneasily. Do you think it's the Harbottle file going public? Possibly, or something else entirely. We'll be there early. Quiet presence, uniforms discreet. By 11:30, the square had already drawn a curious crowd. The weekly farmers' stalls had conveniently arranged themselves further to the north, leaving the bandstand clear, though many lingered within view, noses turned toward it under the pretense of examining leeks or rhubarb. Purbright stood near a stone trough with Sergeant Love, both in plain clothes. A pair of constables milled casually among the stalls, one posing as a market inspector. At 11:47, a boy on a bicycle rode up and stopped beside the bandstand. He reached into a satchel and removed an envelope, placing it carefully on the wooden floor before pedaling off without a word. Purbright took a single step forward. Love breathed. Is that our drop? I suspect so. Before they could intervene, a young woman in a bright yellow coat broke from the crowd. She darted up the bandstand steps, snatched the envelope, and turned dramatically to face the square. Her voice carried, clear and bright. Flaxborough deserves the truth, she cried. The council has hidden its sins long enough. She tore open the envelope and held up the paper inside for all to see. Gasps followed, not from the words on the sheet, but from the signature at the bottom, Clarissa Harbottle. Love muttered, That's not just her file, that's her confession. Purbright moved. Calmly but decisively, he stepped through the crowd and onto the bandstand. The young woman's confidence wavered as he approached. He took the paper gently from her hands and read it in full. The letter was short. I, Clarissa Harbottle, acknowledge the use of council funds for private reimbursements under advisement from Alderman Mowbray and Treasurer Linton. I regret the concealment, but not the cause. The funds helped avert an inquiry that would have destroyed more lives than it saved. Purbright folded the page and looked at the woman. Your name? She glanced around as if considering flight, then squared her shoulders. Eva Denton. Are you the author? She hesitated. Number I was told to read it, that it was important. A man gave it to me this morning, said the town needed to know. Purbright's gaze narrowed. What man? I didn't know him. Dark coat, glasses. Spoke like someone used to being obeyed. He turned to the constables below. Take Miss Denton in for questioning. Discreetly. She went without resistance. Love joined him on the bandstand. This is spiraling, sir. Whoever's behind it, they're not just trying to disgrace people. They're setting the crowd on fire. Purbright nodded. That wasn't a reveal. It was a performance. He held up the confession again. And this was written by Harbottle. No question. But the delivery, the timing, that wasn't her. Then who? Love asked. Purbright stared out at the crowd dispersing under murmurs and speculations. Someone with access to Harbottle's files. Someone who knew the council vote was scheduled today. Someone using each exposure as a stepping stone to something bigger. Love frowned. But what's bigger than this? Purbright didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned and stepped down from the bandstand, looking toward the clock tower. Noon struck, its chimes clean and unhurried. Then, as if precisely cued, a scream tore through the crowd. It came from the north edge of the square, near the pastry stall. A woman knelt beside a man on the ground, his head against the cobblestones, eyes wide in silent shock. Blood pooled beneath his collar. A small, familiar slit ran across the front of his envelope, still clutched in one hand. Love dashed toward them. It's Linton. Edgar Linton. Purbright was already moving. He crouched beside the treasurer, but it was no use. The man was gone. The envelope contained nothing but a blank sheet of paper, except for one line written in the same red ink as the map dot. The final act will not be written in ink. Purbright stood slowly. It's no longer just exposure, he said. Now it's punishment. Love stared at him. Sir, we've got a murderer. Purbright looked toward the crowd, now frozen in a mixture of fear and voyeurism. No, he said quietly. We have an executioner. More answers in Chapter 5. But first, what's your theory? Was the bandstand confession meant to distract from the real target? Who handed Eva Denton the letter? And why did Linton have a blank one? Has the killer just taken center stage? Comment below. The town square had never emptied so quickly. Stall holders packed up their vegetables in jars with trembling hands, pretending not to have seen what they had seen. Mothers ushered children behind hedges, and shopkeepers locked doors under the excuse of early lunch. Only the constables and a few councilmen remained, along with Eva Denton seated on the low stone ledge of the bandstand, her yellow coat now shockingly out of place. She stared ahead, pale, uncertain if she had just been a participant or a pawn. Edgar Linton's body had already been removed, a white sheet covering the blood-stained cobbles. But the red ink still glistened on the blank page clenched in his stiff fingers. The final act will not be written in ink. Back at the station, Purbright paced. This wasn't impulsive, he said. It was deliberate, timed, controlled. A public stage, a scheduled spectacle, and just when we think the revelation is the climax, the real act begins. Love leaned against the edge of the desk, arms folded, brow knitted. You think Linton was the target all along? Purbright stopped. I think Linton was the tipping point. The scandal had been mounting, the letters, the staged releases, each one pulling the town deeper into moral performance. But this, he gestured toward the desk, where the blood-stained page lay in a sealed evidence bag. This is no longer about guilt. It's about justice, or someone's idea of it. They returned to Eva Denton, who now sat quietly in the interview room, hands clenched in her lap. She looked exhausted, but her voice was calm. "I didn't know what was in the envelope," she said. "I was told it was a speech, something to read at noon, that it would help Flaxborough find its conscience." "Who told you that?" Purbright asked. She hesitated. "He didn't give a name. Came into the library 2 days ago. I work in archives on Tuesdays. Said he was researching old Rotary records. Then yesterday he found me again. Same man. Asked if I wanted to be part of something important. He gave me the envelope and told me to wait for the bandstand." "What did he look like?" "Tall. Early 50s, maybe. Brown overcoat, glasses. Very correct, like a teacher." Love scribbled the description. "Would you recognize him again?" "I think so." Purbright nodded. "You may be the only living person to have seen the orchestrator in the act." Outside, the press had begun to gather. Mr. Gloss from the Citizen was already assembling phrases like Rotary slayings and council carnage for tomorrow's front page. Purbright ignored them. He had a more pressing lead. "Sergeant, we're going to council records." "But it's Friday, sir." "Yes, and the town just witnessed a murder tied to a council vote." They arrived at the offices on Saxon Street. Behind a frosted glass door sat Julian Larch, returned to his desk and looking pale but composed. "Still not feeling well, Mr. Larch?" Purbright asked as they entered. Larch stood immediately. "I'm sorry. I didn't know about Linton. I swear, I haven't touched anything since last night. I haven't even left this room." Purbright moved past him, scanning the shelves until he found a box labeled Rotary, Speeches and Agendas. He opened it. Among the typed minutes and ceremonial scripts was a set of folded pages labeled Confidential Rotary Address, 2003. One had been removed recently. The dust pattern revealed it. Another page had handwritten annotations along the margins, and one line had been underlined. "Vote to suppress financial anomalies during fundraising dinner." Love read over his shoulder. "Council suppression, that's 20 years ago." Purbright said quietly, "But our orchestrator's building a narrative. Not a list of crimes, an evolution, a legacy of rot." He turned to Larch. "Who else has access to these records?" "Technically, only me, the clerk, and the deputy treasurer. But they're barely touched anymore. I've kept the key since 2018, and before that." Larch hesitated. "Linton, he liked to review them, said the past had loose ends." Purbright turned back to the box. "Apparently, someone else agrees." He lifted another sheet from the box. A list of former Rotary Committee members, several crossed out in red pen. Mowbray, Linton, Harbottle, and now, in fresh ink, circled at the bottom, Purbright. Love saw it at the same time. "Sir," Purbright folded the page carefully. "The author has turned on the director." Back at the station, Constable Brackley entered with a statement. "Sir, the boy who delivered the envelope to the bandstand. Colin Rudge. We found him. Says someone paid him 10 quid to ride past and drop it." "Who?" "Same description as the man Eva Denton gave us." Purbright leaned forward. "Did he say anything else?" Brackley hesitated. "Yes, sir. Said the man told him this was the final stage rehearsal before opening night." Love muttered. "Final stage. We're not in a scandal anymore. We're in a tragedy." Purbright stood. "Then it's time we found the playwright." Before they could plan their next move, a call came in. A constable's voice crackled on the radio. Sir, we've had a report. The Flaxborough Players Theatre. There's been a break-in, stage door forced, and something's been left on the main curtain. Purbright's reply was immediate. We're on our way. 10 minutes later, they stood inside the small community theatre. Dust and echo filled the hall. On the curtain, written in thick red ink, was a single phrase. The finale is set. The audience is watching. And beneath it, pinned to the fabric with a brass letter opener, an envelope. Unopened. More answers in Chapter 6. But first, what's your theory? Who's directing this theatre of humiliation and blood? Why include Purbright's name now, and what will be inside that final envelope? Comment below. The community theatre had not seen so much attention since the failed pantomime revival of 2017, when the mayor had tripped over a prop goose and fractured his pride. Now, the air inside was different. Not dust and amateur dramatics, but something colder, intentional, calculated. The scent of old velvet and fresh ink mingled as Inspector Purbright stood beneath the stage lights, his eyes fixed on the curtain. The red lettering was unmistakable, a new message scrawled in thick strokes. The finale is set. The audience is watching. The brass letter opener held the envelope in place, plunged into the curtain's fabric with theatrical flair. It was not torn or rusted, but polished, and bore an engraving, FRC, Flaxborough Rotary Club. Purbright removed the opener gently and eased the envelope free. Same slit along the top. Same paper stock. But this time, no typed message. Just a single page. Handwritten. Elegant cursive like someone signing an invitation. One final sin remains. The one that required all the others. And now, the theatre is booked for its return. Love stood beside him, frowning. That doesn't read like a threat. It reads like a plan. Purbright folded the paper. Not a plan. A performance schedule. He turned slowly, eyes scanning the auditorium. Theatre, Rotary, Council, public stage. All of it is linked. This is someone who sees themselves not as a criminal, but as an artist. Each exposure is a scene. Each witness is a cast member. Love glanced up toward the balcony. And each death, an encore. Purbright didn't answer. He walked up the stage stairs and studied the area behind the curtain. Boxes of props, dusty costumes, and old backdrops depicting parishes and parades. Nothing recent, nothing out of place. But near the lighting rig, wedged behind a support beam, was a reel of film. 8 millimeters. Unlabeled. He called for Brackley, who was assisting the search, and handed it off. Take this to Miss Betton in the archives. Tell her we'll need a projector within the hour. As they stepped out into the street, dusk was falling over Flaxborough. The town had gone quieter than usual, unsure whether to carry on or crouch beneath the weight of what had happened. The market was abandoned. The square was taped off. The Citizen building lit up with frantic journalism. But the theatre? It waited. At the station, Miss Betton had prepared a small viewing room. Purbright, Love, and 2 constables gathered as the projector clicked to life. The film flickered on the screen in black and white. No sound. First, a wide shot of the Rotary Luncheon from above. Shot through a high window, possibly the town hall's upper office. There was Mowbray, Harbottle, Linton, even Julian Larch. The image jumped, cut to closer views, not zoomed but filmed separately. Mowbray unfolded his napkin. The envelope is falling. Harbottle's expression as she bent to retrieve a sheet. Linton wipes his brow. None of them noticed the camera. Love whispered. This was filmed in real time. Someone knew exactly when and where it would happen. The film continued. A slow pan across the tables. Then a strange transition, hard cut to an older scene. A council vote, 17 years ago, judging by the banners on the walls. Same location, but the faces were younger. Mowbray again, Linton with darker hair, and in the back, barely visible, a man in a brown suit, taking notes. Purbright paused the projector. "That's our suspect." Love leaned in. "You sure?" "Number, but he's the only one who appears in both scenes without being named." The film ended with a final still frame, a typed slide, white letters on black. "For every lie inked, a name will bleed. Next, the stage of reckoning." Love spoke first. "Whoever made this, he's not just exposing them. He's been planning this for years." Purbright remained still. "More than planning, archiving, documenting, directing. He filmed the present, but he had access to the past. He knew where to be, what to capture, and how to show it." Miss Betton stepped forward. "Inspector." That man in the brown suit, he was at the town archives 3 weeks ago, said he was researching Flaxborough's civic events for a local history piece. Had credentials, claimed to be a visiting lecturer. Purbright turned to her. "Did you take his name?" She nodded. "Said he was Dr. Clement Rowe." From Leeds University, Love's eyes widened. "FRC, the initials on the letter opener." "Flaxborough Rotary Club," Purbright said, "or Felix Rowe Clement." Miss Betton frowned. "No, I'm sure he said Clement Rowe. I wrote it down." Purbright exhaled slowly. "An alias, a blend. He's been leaving just enough to be found, by design, but only when he wants to be." A knock interrupted them. It was Brackley again. "Sir, something new. The mayor's secretary just brought this in. Found it on the mayor's chair in the council chamber. Another envelope." Purbright opened it. This time, there was no message, only a photo. It showed a stage, the same community theatre, but dated. 4 years ago, judging by the calendar barely visible in the background. On the stage, a man knelt in front of a microphone, shaking hands with Alderman Mowbray. Behind them, a woman, barely visible. Purbright blinked. "That's Mrs. Harbottle." Love leaned in. "What's the significance?" "Look closer." Behind Harbottle, in the crowd, stood a man in a brown suit. Not participating, not clapping, just watching. Love said, "It's him again. He's always there." "More than that," Purbright whispered. "He's been collecting moments, witnessing sins no one else saw." They sat in silence for a moment, the room dimmed by the projection screen and something heavier. Awareness. Whoever was behind this wasn't merely avenging a scandal. He was memorializing it. Purbright stood. "Next envelope won't arrive. It'll be performed. He's shifting from letters to live acts. And the theatre, that's where he'll make his grand entrance." Love asked, "How do we find him?" "We don't." Purbright turned to the screen where the last frame still lingered. The stage of reckoning. "We set the stage for him." More answers in Chapter 7. "But first, what's your theory? Is Clement Rowe a ghost from the council's past, or a creation built from it? Why has the theatre been chosen as his final venue? And what will happen when Purbright becomes part of the performance?" Comment below. The next morning brought rain. It came not as a cleansing shower, but a thin, persistent drizzle that veiled the town in damp melancholy, as though Flaxborough itself wished to mourn without drawing too much attention. A hush hung over the square, broken only by the occasional distant hum of a milk float or the rattle of shutters being reluctantly raised. Yet behind the station's doors, something colder than the weather had taken hold. Inspector Purbright sat at his desk, a stack of ledgers and documents fanned out in front of him. Julian Larcher's ledgers. Council minutes. Theatre programs date back a decade. In one corner sat the envelope pinned to the curtain, now carefully preserved in a protective sleeve, and beside it lay the photograph from the council event. The same brown-suited man standing behind the players, ever watching, never participating. He turned the photo over. Nothing but a faint penciled date. 2019. "Sergeant," he said without looking up, "we need the archive visitor logs from the past year, and cross-reference them with bookings at the theater." Love, seated nearby, scribbled a note. "Already asked Miss Betton. She's preparing them, but there's something else." Purbright looked up. The mayor's secretary said Clement Rowe, or whoever he is, wasn't just researching Rotary records. He also requested old town hall blueprints, especially floor plans for the theater and council chamber. "That confirms it," Purbright murmured. "He's not improvising. He's designing the final act." Love leaned forward. "You think he's going to strike during the next council vote?" "Too predictable. He's already used that stage. No, he'll wait for a new setting, one with legacy, one that connects all the pieces." He tapped the curtain photo. "Theater. But we've already swept it. We saw what he wanted us to see. Now we must look for what he's concealed." Their thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Miss Betton entered, slightly out of breath and holding a bundle of files. "I found something. It's not on the visitor logs. It's what's missing." She laid out the ledger. 6 weeks ago, someone accessed the microfilm collection. They requested all issues of The Citizen from 2003 to 2005. But they didn't sign the logbook. Love frowned. "Someone bypassed the record." Miss Betton nodded. "They knew how the system worked, knew what wouldn't trigger suspicion." Purbright flipped through the files. "That timeline aligns with the Rotary financial suppression vote and the mayoral reshuffle. If you were looking to build a motive for vengeance, it's fertile ground." Miss Betton hesitated. "There's something else." She handed Purbright a thin pamphlet, yellowing with age. The front read, "The Parable of the Archivist, a Civic Fable by F.R. Clement." Love squinted. "What is this?" "A short story," Miss Betton said, "submitted anonymously to the 2004 Flaxborough Literary Festival. Never published, but archived." Purbright opened it, reading aloud. "In a quiet town, an archivist watched the townspeople forget their sins. They lied in public and wept in private. The archivist, with no power and no vote, began to collect. He wrote what they erased. He preserved what they denied, until the day he realized, if no one else would remember, he would make them." He looked up. "It's him. This is his doctrine." Love murmured. "A quiet man, collecting outrage like kindling." "And now," Purbright said, "he struck the match." Just then, Brackley entered with urgency. "Sir, you'll want to see this." They followed him to the front desk, where a parcel waited, delivered not by post but by hand. No return address. Inside was another reel of 8mm film and a single note. "Tonight at 9. A private rehearsal. No audience required." Back in the projection room, the film played. This time the theater was empty. Shot from the back of the auditorium, a man stepped onto the stage. Alone, brown coat, glasses. He stood at the center, arms folded behind his back. He began to speak, silently of course, but gestured as if delivering a monologue. Then he stepped forward and pointed to 5 spots across the stage. Then behind him, a backdrop dropped slowly to reveal an image, the Flaxborough town seal. Another card appeared, one for greed, one for silence, one for shame, one for pride, and one for forgetting. Love shifted. 5 victims? Purbright nodded. 4 have been named. 1 is missing. He froze. Number not missing. Masked. He stood. Sergeant. Gather everyone who's been implicated so far. Mowbray, Harbottle, Larch, the mayor, even Gloss. All of them. Tonight. At the theater? Yes. But we won't wait for the killer. We'll stage our own performance. Love stared at him. You're baiting him. Number, I'm offering him the ending he's written. Only this time, we're in the audience. More answers in Chapter 8. But first, What's your theory? What is the meaning behind the 5 labels, and who is the final masked figure? Will the theater's next performance be revelation or ruin? Comment below. By 8:30 that evening, the Flaxborough Players Theatre was no longer silent. Beneath its familiar wooden arches and faded crimson curtains, rows of cushioned seats were filled not with townsfolk waiting for farce or pantomime, but with key figures now reluctantly drawn into the orbit of something far more consequential. Alderman Mowbray sat stiffly in the second row, his mustache drooping with unspoken tension. Clarissa Harbottle arrived late, gliding down the aisle in a dark wool coat, expression unreadable. Julian Larch hovered near the aisle seat, wringing his hands, and Mr. Gloss of the Citizen had brought a notebook he never once opened. Purbright stood at the edge of the stage. No uniform, no spotlight, just his quiet presence. A single chair was placed center stage, empty, waiting. The rest of the stage was bare except for the drawn curtain behind him, and the town seal now hung just above the proscenium arch. It was the exact backdrop used in the photograph, the very setting their elusive director had chosen again and again. Love stood beside the curtain pulley, nervously adjusting his tie. "Do you think he'll come?" Purbright's gaze remained on the empty chair. He already has. The theatre doors had been unlocked since sunset. A sign on the outer glass read, "Council Reflection Meeting. Private event. No constables in sight, at least none in uniform. But 4 officers were stationed at the exits, plainclothes, under Purbright's instruction. No announcements had been made. No press notified. Because this wasn't a trap. It was an invitation. At precisely 8:59, the theatre doors opened one final time. A man stepped in quietly and moved to the middle row, 5th seat in. He wore a brown overcoat, horn-rimmed glasses, and carried nothing but a leather-bound folder. His hair was graying, his posture straight but unhurried. No one turned to look at him. No one needed to. They all knew, whether by instinct or guilt or both. He sat down. Purbright waited a moment, then nodded to Love. The curtains drew back. Behind them stood nothing but a projection screen. Miss Betton, hidden in the tech booth, clicked the switch. The film played. It was the same footage shown before. The luncheon, the Rotary meeting, the bandstand. But this time, it ended differently. A new segment appeared. Black and white. Grainy. It showed the aftermath of a council vote, the chamber half empty. The camera panned to a lone man collecting papers, Felix Rowe Clement or Clement Rowe, or whatever version he preferred. He was younger, thinner, but unmistakable. A footnote in the scene. He paused, looked at the camera, then silently smiled. The screen went black. Purbright stepped forward. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the one who has haunted this town without speaking, until now. The man in the brown coat did not move. Purbright continued, "He has called out your sins. He has filmed your faces. He has performed your guilt with more discipline and flair than most of you ever managed in the office. But tonight, he's not here to condemn. He's here to finish his script." There was silence in the room. Then Clement stood. He didn't flee. He didn't speak. He walked calmly down the aisle and stepped onto the stage, as if summoned by cue. He looked at Purbright. "You found my parable." "I read your sermon," Purbright replied. "But you missed something." Clement raised an eyebrow. "Redemption," Purbright said simply. "Your fable offers remembrance, correction, but no return. Just spectacle. You wanted to punish silence with volume, but you forgot silence is where truth often waits." Clement's voice was steady. "Truth was buried. I unearthed it." "By becoming the thing you despised," Purbright countered. Clement opened his folder and withdrew 5 sheets, one for each person seated in the front rows. "Each of them," he said, covered up what could have been fixed. Misused funds, ignored misconduct, sanitized minutes, and now they'll listen in the order they first forgot. He moved toward the first seat. Mowbray. Purbright didn't stop him. Not yet. Clement read aloud. October 2004. Donation redirected from youth development to a private catering firm with a silent shareholder. Alderman Hector Mowbray. Mowbray stiffened but said nothing. Next, gloss. March 2005. Local press agreed to suppress whistleblower testimony in exchange for exclusive access to civic events. Gloss's face went pale. Next, Harbottle. July 2010. Discretionary fund approved for a confidential settlement, not recorded in official accounts. Signatory, C.H. Clarissa said nothing, but she did not deny it. Then, Larch. Reinstated after resignation due to a financial discrepancy. On the condition that all council memos he handled would be reviewed by one man only, Edgar Linton. And finally, Clement held up the last page. This one's blank, he said softly. Because it belongs to you, Inspector, not for crimes committed, but for seeing them and choosing procedure. Love moved then, uncertain. He didn't choose silence. No, Clement said. He chose law, and law protects memory, but never corrects it. Purbright stepped closer. You're right, he said. I chose law, and you chose theatre. But both demand rehearsal. You've played your part, Mr. Rowe, and now your performance has reached its final line. Clement looked at him, then let the curtain fall. He held out the folder, gently, surrendering. Purbright took it. Officers moved in, quietly, respectfully. Clement said nothing else as he was led away. But just before the exit, he turned and faced the stage one last time. History doesn't whisper, he said. It waits. More answers in Chapter 9. But first, what's your theory? Has the final act ended, or has a new one begun? What else lies in that folder, and who might it expose next? Comment below. The theatre emptied slowly, as though the townspeople feared a final act might yet emerge from behind the curtains. But the man in the brown coat was gone now, escorted in silence through the side door by officers who spoke no words and carried no urgency. The audience, no longer spectators, but reluctantly implicated characters, filed out under a silence so thick it seemed to muffle even the creak of old floorboards. Back at the station, Clement sat alone in the interview room. He had said nothing since handing over the folder. No requests, no apologies. Only a nod when asked if he wanted water, and a polite thank you when it was brought. Inspector Purbright had not spoken to him again. Not yet. Instead, he sat with the folder in his lap, the weight of it heavier than any weapon he'd ever seen used in anger. The file wasn't just a collection of documents, it was a chronology of civic betrayal. Annotated minutes, altered receipts, memos with the original ink line scraped off, then corrected in a firmer, guiltier hand. Most damning of all was a photograph, tucked at the back, dated 5 years earlier. It showed the council chamber, post-meeting. Clarissa Harbottle, Edgar Linton, and Mowbray were standing together, hands clasped in front of them, smiling. Behind them, almost invisible, sat a woman in a navy blouse. Her name, written on the back in pencil, was Annie Rowe. Purbright called for Love. "Have you seen this?" he asked, handing the photograph over. Love took it, frowning. "That's her, isn't it?" "I believe so. She worked for the council, didn't she?" "Clerical assistant," Purbright confirmed. 2 years. She resigned in 2018. No formal complaint, no exit interview, just a letter of resignation. She never worked again. Love looked down at the name again. "She was his sister?" Purbright gave a slow nod. That's the thread he pulled. Not revenge for himself, vengeance in someone else's name. Love's voice dropped. Do you think she... I don't know, Purbright said, but I intend to ask. He walked into the interview room and sat opposite Clement. For a time, they said nothing. Eventually, Clement broke the silence. You found her. Purbright didn't answer the question. Why now? Why wait 5 years? Clement folded his hands. Because 5 years is how long it took for the records to resurface, for the seals to come loose, for silence to stretch so thin it became translucent. Purbright kept his voice even. Did your sister take her own life? No, Clement said, but she lost everything. She was made to believe the mistake was hers, the budget discrepancy, the unlogged invoice. They let her wear it, and when she asked for help, they offered redundancy. She left quietly. And when I returned to visit that spring, she wasn't Annie anymore. Just a ghost with a name tag she'd torn off. Purbright nodded once. I'm sorry. Clement looked up. That's why I documented. That's why I waited. Not for justice. That's rarely given, but for memory. Because in this town, crimes fade, but performances remain. If they were going to forget her, I'd make them remember everything. Purbright leaned forward. And the killings. Linton. A flicker crossed Clement's expression. The first break. I warned him, he said quietly. In the letter. He had days to step forward. I told him exactly what was coming. But you didn't intend to kill him. No, Clement said, staring at his hands. But I wrote the ending, and once you've written it... He didn't finish the sentence. Outside the room, Love waited with the final piece of the puzzle, the coroner's report for Linton. Death by a puncture wound to the neck. Thin blade. No fingerprints. No witness. No camera caught it. Whoever delivered the envelope that day had known exactly when to strike and how. But the letter opener used to pin the final envelope at the theater didn't match the wound. Purbright returned to his office and sat down, mind turning over not just Clement's acts, but their framing, the performances, the handwritten confessions, the filmed reactions, the blank sheet in Linton's hand, the only one different. He opened the folder again and flipped to the page beneath the Annie Rowe photo. It wasn't typed. It was a handwritten note. I did not kill him. But I cannot say I grieve, for some ink is too dark to erase. Purbright tapped his fingers on the desk. So either he had help, he murmured, or someone else used his theater. Love looked up. You think someone hijacked the finale? Perhaps. Or perhaps the finale isn't over. Just then the desk phone rang. It was Miss Betton. There's been another envelope, Inspector, she said, voice uneasy. This one wasn't delivered. It was already in the archives, filed under anonymous donations. Found it by accident just now while replacing last month's council report. Is it sealed? No, sir. It's addressed to you. He arrived at the archives 10 minutes later. The envelope was aged, at least 3 years old. The paper is brittle at the edges, the slit already yellowed. Inside was a small page, typed. I know you'll come to find this. You always return to the records. There is one story left, one sin no one will name. Because it wasn't committed by a councilman. It was covered up by a constable. Ask Sergeant Love about his application to transfer. Ask him why it was denied, and who signed the letter. Purbright read it twice, then once more. He folded it slowly, slid it into his coat pocket, and looked out across the archive shelves. Rain pattered softly on the window. History doesn't whisper. It waits. More answers in Chapter 10. But first, what's your theory? Was Clement truly alone, or did someone else write the final scene? And what is Sergeant Love hiding or protecting? Comment below. The rain had intensified by the time Inspector Purbright returned to the station, the kind of persistent downpour that seemed less interested in cleansing the streets than in blurring their edges. Water streaked down the station's tall windows, turning the world outside into a vague, impressionist smudge. Inside, the walls held the kind of quiet that arrives when a question too large to ignore has been asked, and no one has yet dared to answer it. Purbright closed the door to his office and hung his coat with precise care, as though the movement itself might sharpen his thoughts. The envelope from the archives now lay on his desk, the note inside folded 3 times and, once again, folds that had not come from Purbright's hand. He stared at it for a long time. Then, without lifting his voice, he called out, "Sergeant Love, would you step inside, please?" Love entered, his hands holding the latest file from forensics, but he paused when he saw the expression on Purbright's face. Something in the air told him this wasn't about reports. Purbright gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit down, Sergeant." Love did. A moment passed. Purbright leaned forward, his tone measured. "There's a letter, found in the archives, misfiled but clearly intended to be found, addressed to me. It mentions a transfer request. Yours." Love's face didn't change. Not at first, but his hand tightened slightly around the folder. Purbright continued. "It claims you applied for reassignment. It was denied. The letter was signed by someone not in personnel, but it doesn't say who. Just implies it was manipulated." Love's jaw tightened, but he still didn't speak. Purbright watched him. "Is it true?" Love exhaled, slow and heavy. "Yes, I applied last year, quietly, after the Jarvis case. That was resolved." "Not for me." Purbright nodded once. "And the denial?" Love hesitated. "That's the part I never understood. HR said the rejection came from an internal recommendation, but I never saw the letter. They said it was confidential. At the time, I thought maybe you'd intervened." "I didn't," Purbright said simply. "But someone did." Love looked away, ashamed. "I didn't think it mattered anymore. I stayed. I did the job. But someone didn't want you to leave," Purbright said quietly. "And now that fact is being used against us." Love's head lifted. "You think Clement knew, or someone else did, and used his chaos to slip that note in unnoticed?" Love's voice dropped. "But why would anyone care about a failed transfer?" Purbright sat back. "Because transfer requests have fingerprints, names, dates, administrative chains. If someone else intervened, someone outside the official process, they left a trail." He stood, crossed to the records cabinet, and pulled out the personnel drawer. Love's file was thick, mostly unremarkable. Years of steady service, commendations. One brief suspension in 2017 for a procedural misstep, long since resolved. And near the back, a sealed envelope marked "Internal Recommendation, Confidential." Purbright opened it. Inside was a letter, typed, no letterhead, no departmental stamp. But the signature was real enough. Hector Mowbray. Purbright read it aloud. "I strongly advise against approving Sergeant Edward Love's transfer at this time. His local knowledge is critical to ongoing community trust, and any sudden movement may raise unnecessary questions about previous inquiries. Signed, Alderman Mowbray." Love blinked. He blocked it. Purbright's voice was flat. He had no authority, not in staffing. So why did they listen? Because people like Mowbray are practiced in making suggestions sound like orders. Love stood slowly, shock settling into the corners of his shoulders. "Why would he care where I went?" Purbright stared at the letter again. "Because if you left, you might start talking or be asked to. And something in your head, something you dismissed as background, could have been enough to unravel the whole facade." Love's brow furrowed. But I've never... He stopped. Then he sat down again, suddenly pale. There was a meeting, he said quietly. 2 years ago, I wasn't supposed to be there. I was just returning a council security fob. I walked into the room thinking it was empty. But Harbottle and Linton were there. And Mowbray. They were talking about the Hallworth funding report, laughing about how the decimal had accidentally moved. You never reported it? Purbright asked, his voice calm. I didn't understand it at the time. I thought it was political, not criminal. I was still green. I told myself I'd imagined the context. You were the loose thread, Purbright said, and Mowbray tied it before it could fray. Love slumped forward, hands to his face. I thought I was past all that. You never were, Purbright replied. You were just kept close. Outside the office, a sudden shout interrupted them. Brackley burst in, breathless. Sir, another delivery. No envelope this time, just a box. Left at the theatre entrance again. They followed him out. The box sat sealed in plastic on the evidence table. Inside, a reel of tape, cassette, not film, and a note, typed. One last voice remains unheard. It's not mine. Purbright turned it over. No other message. Just a number written in red ink. 5. He looked at Love. The 5th act, he said. And this one won't be seen. It'll be heard. More answers in Chapter 11. But first, what's your theory? Who recorded the final tape, and why hide it until now? Was Mowbray hiding more than corruption? Or was someone else pulling his strings? Comment below. The cassette tape was heavier than it looked. Purbright turned it over in his hand, as though it might speak even before playing. The small plastic housing bore no label beyond the red-inked number scrawled on one side. 5. No name, no origin. Just the final act of a performance that had twisted from whispers into film, from paper to blood. In the evidence room, they found an old tape recorder, slightly dusty, the buttons a little stiff, but still functional. Love hovered near the doorway as Purbright pressed play. The machine clicked softly, then whirred. For a few seconds, there was only a hiss, like air sucked from the lungs of a sleeping house. Then a voice. Software female. This is for the record. Whether anyone listens, I don't know, but I need to say it somewhere. Purbright's spine straightened. He didn't look at Love. He didn't need to. My name is Annie Rowe. The voice was composed, but brittle, the kind of calm that comes after every tear has already been shed. I didn't make a mistake. I didn't miscalculate the invoice. I didn't misplace the decimal. I flagged it. I filed a concern. I wrote 3 separate memos about the shortfall in the Hallworth redevelopment line. Pause. Each one was ignored. The last one disappeared from the system. I know because I went looking for it a week later, and my login was locked out. Love stood frozen. Purbright's eyes remained fixed on the speaker, though she was nowhere to be seen. They brought me in for a clarification meeting. Edgar Linton, Clarissa Harbottle, and Alderman Mowbray. They smiled through the whole thing. Said mistakes happen. Said it would be best if I didn't speak publicly to avoid reputational damage to the council. They said they could offer me a generous exit package. Quiet, dignified. The hiss returned briefly, like a breath caught between truths. I didn't take the payout. I just left. I thought maybe if I left I could forget, but all it did was hollow something in me. I watched Mowbray speak at events. I watched Harbottle sit on charity boards. I saw Linton promoted twice, and I wondered how long a lie could keep blooming. Silence again. Then her voice dropped. My brother's been staying with me. He suspects. I haven't told him everything. He thinks I was betrayed. He doesn't know I feel responsible. I gave them the silence they wanted. But it's not silent anymore. It's noise. Inside. Another pause. Then, if anything happens, if this recording is ever heard, I want it to be clear. I didn't fall apart. I was taken apart, piece by piece. Not all crimes leave bruises. Some wear down your name until even you forget it. The tape clicked, stopped. Love looked down. She recorded it. Purbright turned off the machine, and she never gave it to anyone. Then how did it end up in that box? She may not have. Someone else might have taken it. Maybe Clement found it. Maybe someone else found it and hid it. But why hide it for years, then plant it now? Purbright tapped the number. Because it was always meant to be the fifth act, the unseen one, the voice of the victim, not interpreted, not manipulated, just heard, at the end. He stood slowly. We have one thing left to do. That evening, the theatre was opened once more. Not for scandal, not for spectacle, but for reckoning. The chairs were arranged, the lights softened, and a small cassette player was placed at the edge of the stage. The room wasn't full, just the necessary people. Mowbray, Harbottle, Larch, Gloss, and a few others who had once moved in confident circles behind closed doors. Clement Rowe sat quietly in the front row. No cuffs, no protest, just stillness. Purbright stepped up, nodded to the technician, and pressed play. Annie Rowe's voice filled the theatre. No commentary followed, no explanation, no applause. When the tape finished, Purbright turned it off and looked at the room. This voice, he said quietly, was never on your committee minutes. Never printed in the Citizen, never invited to a luncheon. But it was always here. Mowbray said nothing. His lips had gone thin, like someone who had just realized a long game had ended without him noticing the final move. Harbottle stared down at her lap. Larch shifted uncomfortably. Gloss reached for his pen, then set it down again. Purbright's gaze swept the room. There will be inquiries, legal ones. Some of you may find yourselves facing more than embarrassment. That's no longer my part to play. He turned toward Clement. You were right, he said. The record needed correcting. Clement's eyes flickered. And now? Now it's preserved. Not manipulated, not performed. Just truth. Love remained at the back of the theatre, away from the others. As the room emptied, he walked down the aisle toward Purbright. I didn't protect her, he said. I didn't protect Annie. You didn't know, Purbright replied. But I do now. Purbright placed a hand on his shoulder. Then make sure no one forgets again. By midnight, the tape had been filed into the official archives, labeled under a new classification. Statement, primary victim testimony. It would never be hidden again. And in the final row of the theatre, left under a seat by no one seen entering or leaving, was a folded piece of paper. On it, 5 words. The play is now memory.